In a bustling mall, a sharp accusation disrupts Naomi's quiet moment, forcing her to confront prejudice with unshakable composure, turning judgment into an unexpected lesson for everyone watching. It was a Saturday afternoon, and the Willow Field Mall buzzed with its usual rhythm. Families wandered through stores, teenagers laughed over oversized sodas, and shoppers balanced bags of newly purchased items. Among the crowd, 38-year-old Naomi Richards moved through the aisles with quiet purpose. She wasn't shopping today, just taking a short break from her hectic schedule. As a freelance writer, her outfit was simple: a well-loved cardigan, jeans and sneakers. To Naomi, comfort always came first, but not everyone saw it that way. As Naomi paused near a bench in the mall's central atrium, a voice sliced through the air, sharp, clipped and tinged with something more than impatience. "Excuse me, do you even belong here?" Naomi turned, startled. A woman in a tailored blazer and oversized sunglasses stood just a few feet away, her designer purse clutched like a shield. The woman, who looked to be in her mid-50s, had that polished air of someone who rarely heard the word no. Her lips curled into a faint sneer, and her eyes flickered over Naomi, as though scanning for flaws. "I'm sorry," Naomi said, confused. "You heard me." The woman's tone hardened. "You're loitering. People like you make it hard for businesses to keep their spaces clean and welcoming." Naomi blinked. For a moment she wondered if she'd misheard. The accusation felt so sudden, so unwarranted, that it didn't even make sense. "Loitering," she repeated. "I'm just sitting here," the woman huffed, crossing her arms. "And I suppose you're waiting for someone to give you a handout. Or maybe you're casing the place." Naomi's stomach tightened. It wasn't just what the woman was saying, it was how she said it, the implication in her words, the judgment in her tone, and the fact that every eye in the vicinity seemed to shift toward them. Naomi felt the weight of those stares, but she didn't rise from the bench. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, her voice calm but firm. "Ma'am, I think you've made a mistake." The woman's laugh was sharp and humorless. "Oh, I doubt it. You can't expect to walk into a place like this and not stand out." And that's when the crowd started to gather. Shoppers slowed their pace, their curiosity piqued by the confrontation. Some exchanged nervous glances, others whispered their expressions, flickering between discomfort and interest. But no one intervened yet. But there was a tension in the air now, a sense that this encounter was only just beginning. Naomi took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. The mall's hum seemed to fade as the woman's voice rang louder, dripping with disdain. It wasn't just the accusation, it was the confidence with which the woman delivered it, as though her assumptions were irrefutable facts. "You have no idea who I am or why I'm here," Naomi said, keeping her tone even. "And yet you feel entitled to judge me." The woman scoffed, flipping her perfectly styled hair over one shoulder. "I don't need to know you to see what's obvious. Look at you, you're not shopping. You're just sitting here taking up space, making people uncomfortable. Do you even have a job?" A ripple moved through the small crowd that had gathered. Naomi could see a mix of reactions. Some faces reflected discomfort, others shock, and a few even looked as though they agreed with the woman's harsh words. Naomi caught the gaze of a young mother, holding her child's hand. The mother frowned, her lips pressing into a thin line, but she didn't say anything. Naomi rose slowly from the bench, her movements deliberate. She wasn't going to cower under the weight of this stranger's accusations. She met the woman's gaze directly, her brown eyes unwavering. "I do have a job. In fact, I work hard to support myself and my family. And for the record, I'm sitting here because I can. Because this is a public space." The woman stepped back slightly, as though Naomi's words carried a force she hadn't anticipated, but she recovered quickly, her lips curling into a smirk. "Of course you'd say that. People like you always have an excuse." "People like me," Naomi repeated, her voice steady but sharp now. "And what exactly does that mean?" "Go ahead, say it." The woman hesitated for the first time. The crowd, now thicker, leaned in closer, the tension palpable. A teenage boy in a hoodie pulled out his phone, angling it to record the exchange. Naomi caught the movement out of the corner of her eye. Good, she thought. Let them see this, let them hear every word. You know exactly what I mean. The woman finally said, her voice quieter now, but no less cutting. I'm just saying what everyone else is thinking. No, Naomi said firmly. You're saying what you've been taught to think. There's a difference. A murmur rippled through the crowd. The tension was thick enough to cut, and for the first time, the wealthy woman seemed to notice the growing number of eyes on her. Her confidence faltered just slightly as the realization began to dawn. Naomi wasn't done. You saw me, and instead of seeing a person, you saw a stereotype, and you thought it was your place to police me. Why is that? The woman opened her mouth to respond, but found no words. Her gaze flickered nervously toward the crowd, which had grown restless. Someone in the back muttered, "She's got a point." Naomi stepped forward, closing the space between them just enough to ensure her words couldn't be ignored. If I were dressed differently, if my skin were a shade lighter, would you have said a word to me? Or would I have just been another shopper in the mall? The woman's cheeks flushed, her polished demeanor beginning to crack. She looked around for support, but none came. Even the few who had initially seemed to agree with her stood silent now, their gazes averted. But silence wasn't enough to diffuse the moment. Something had to give as the crowd watched. Naomi took a step back, her voice steady. But so now, the confrontation had shifted, and she saw an opportunity not to humiliate, but to make the woman understand. "I get it," said, folding her arms. "You think you're protecting something, but what are you so afraid of?" The woman hesitated, visibly grappling with the question. She glanced at the crowd, her carefully pitched beginning to crumble. After a long pause, she sighed, her voice low, almost reluctant. "You wouldn't understand. Try me," Naomi replied. For the first time, the woman's mask of arrogance slipped, revealing something more complex: fear, vulnerability, and an amount of shame. "I grew up with nothing," she admitted, her words slow and deliberate. "My parents lost everything in the Russian. I know what it's like to feel invisible, to feel like people are judging you before even know you." Naomi tilted her head, surprised by the admission. The crowd, now hangry word, seemed to hold its collective breath. "You think that gives you the right to judge others?" Naomi asked, on a mix of disbelief and empathy. "Do you realize what you're doing? You've become the very thing you hate. Someone who sees people as less than because of their circumstances." The woman flinched, as if the words hit a nerve. "I didn't mean it like that," she said defensively, but even as she spoke, her faltered. "I think," Naomi said gently, "but I think you can do better." The mall was silent, except for the faint hum of distant EPS and the soft rustle of shopping bag. Naomi stepped back too, and gestured for the woman to sit beside her. Reluctantly, the woman sat her, handing her designer purse like a lifeline. Naomi took a moment, then began to share her own story. "You know, I wasn't always comfortable standing up for myself. I grew up in a small town where people looked at me and decided who I was before I even spoke. It's exhausting fighting those assumptions every day. But I realized something along the way. How people see you says more about them than it does about you." The woman's eyes softened, her defensive posture loosening. For a moment, she looked like someone searching for a lifeline to make sense of her own actions. "I get that fear can make us do ugly things," Naomi continued, "but the problem isn't self, it's what we do with it. Are you going to control you, or are you going to use it to grow?" The crowd, which had initially gathered for drama, now stood quietly, absorbing the exchange. A young man holding his phone put it down, his expression shifting from intrigue to respect. But there was still more to unravel in this moment. A chance for change. If the woman could find the courage to take it. The woman sat in silence for what felt like an eternity, her fingers tracing the edge of her purse, as if searching for the right words. Naomi didn't press her. She knew some battles weren't won with arguments, but with time and introspection. Finally the woman spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I've spent so much of my life trying to prove I'm not what people used to say. I'd become poor, worthless, invisible. Her gaze dropped to the polished floor tiles beneath their feet, and somewhere along the way, I guess I decided that if I didn't look like them, act like them, I'd never be them. Naomi nodded slowly, her expression softening. And by them you mean the people you think I represent? The woman winced, the unspoken truth hanging heavily in the air. She looked up, meeting Naomi's gaze for the first time, without the shield of arrogance. I didn't even realize how much I've been carrying. This fear, this need to separate myself from anyone who reminds me of where I came from. The crowd, still lingering nearby, seemed to collectively lean forward, drawn into the raw vulnerability of the moment. Naomi saw the shift in the woman, the crumbling of a wall she'd likely spent decades building. You're not the only one, Naomi said gently. Fear does that to people. It makes us draw lines, build walls, create others. But what if instead of letting that fear divide us, we let it teach us something? What if we used it to connect? The woman blinked, her eyes glistening. Now I don't know if I can do that. I don't know where to start. Naomi's voice was steady, reassuring. Start by seeing people not what they wear, not where they're sitting, not the color of their skin, just people. The woman nodded slowly, the weight of Naomi's words sinking in. She looked around, noticing the crowd for the first time, not just as spectators, but as individuals, each with their own stories, struggles and fears. A teenage boy stepped forward, hesitantly breaking the stillness. You know, he said, holding up his phone, this whole thing, I got it on video, but maybe people need to see the part where you realized you were wrong. Maybe that's what they need to hear. The woman's eyes widened, a flicker of panic crossing her face. You recorded this? Yeah, the boy said, lowering his phone. But don't worry. I think what she said is more important than the argument. People need to see this, all of it. He glanced at Naomi, his expression earnest. The part where we can actually listen to each other. Naomi gave a small smile, her heart swelling at the boy's words. She turned back to the woman. See, change doesn't have to be this big, impossible thing. It starts with little moments like this, moments where we choose to be better. The woman let out a shaky breath, nodding again. I think I have a lot to learn. Naomi reached out, placing a hand gently on the woman's arm. We all do, and that's okay. But even as the conversation softened, the echoes of this moment would ripple far beyond the mall's walls. The tension in the air seemed to lift, replaced by an almost palpable sense of relief. The crowd began to disperse slowly, whispers of the confrontation mingling with the sounds of mall chatter. Some people stayed lingering nearby, their expressions contemplative. Others walked away with subtle smiles, as though they had witnessed something rare, an argument that had turned into an understanding. The teenage boy, still clutching his phone, looked at Naomi. I'm going to post this, he said, his voice careful not to shame anyone, but to show that people can change. I think we all need to see that. Naomi nodded. Make sure the message is clear. This isn't about tearing someone down. It's about building something better. The boy smiled and walked off, leaving Naomi and the woman sitting together on the bench. They weren't friends, not yet anyway, but there was a sense of mutual respect now, a fragile truce born of vulnerability and honesty. Over the next few days, the video spread across social media like wildfire. It wasn't the confrontation itself that captured people's attention. It was the resolution. The video showed the heated exchange, yes, but it also highlighted the moment. The woman admitted her fears, her biases, and her desire to change. The clip ended with Naomi's powerful words. Change starts with seeing people. Comments flooded in from across the country. Some praised Naomi's composure and wisdom. Others shared their own stories of bias, of moments they had been judged or had judged others, and how they had learned to do better. There were, of course, voices of dissent, but even those couldn't drown out the overwhelming support for the message of accountability and transformation. The video sparked conversations in schools, workplaces, and homes. Teachers used it as a tool to discuss prejudice, and empathy. Community leaders organized events centered around the theme of seeing people. Random acts of kindness began to emerge. In the most unexpected places, a stranger paying for someone's coffee, a neighbor offering help without being asked, a child standing up for a classmate. Even the woman from the mall wasn't untouched by the wave of change. She reached out to Naomi a week later, her voice trembling as she spoke on the phone. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. "You could have torn me apart in front of all those people, but instead you gave me grace. I don't think I deserved it." "Grace isn't about deserving," Naomi replied. "It's about creating space for people to grow, but it's up to you to use that space wisely." The woman agreed. She began attending local community events, volunteering at shelters, and even speaking publicly about her experience. Her transformation wasn't instant. It was messy and imperfect, filled with missteps and doubts, but it was genuine, and it inspired others to take a closer look at their own biases. But as the weeks went on, Naomi knew that the true power of that day wasn't in the video or the woman's actions. It was in the quiet, everyday changes happening all around her. Naomi didn't think much about the video. After her conversation with the woman, life had a way of pulling her back into its rhythms: work deadlines, family gatherings, and the everyday demands that never seemed to pause. But the incident at the mall lingered in her mind, not as a confrontation, but as a reminder of how small moments could ripple outward. A month later, Naomi found herself back at Willowfield Mall. This time, she was shopping for her niece's birthday gift. As she browsed the shelves of a children's bookstore, a woman approached her. It took Naomi a moment to recognize her. It was the same woman from the confrontation, though she looked different now. Her posture was less rigid, her face softer, almost humble. "I hoped I might run into you," the woman said, clutching a small book in her hands. "I'd been wanting to thank you in person." Naomi smiled gently. "You already thanked me." "No," the woman insisted. "What you did that day, standing your ground, but also offering me a way forward. It's been transformative. I started volunteering at the community center downtown. They run programs for people who are struggling, and I've learned so much about what it really means to see people, to listen." "That's a good start," Naomi said. She could see the sincerity in the woman's eyes, a spark of determination that hadn't been there before. The woman hesitated, then held out the book she'd been holding. "I thought of you when I saw this. It's a collection of essays on empathy and understanding. I don't know if it's your kind of thing, but I wanted to give you something to show my gratitude." Naomi accepted the book, her heart warming at the gesture. "Thank you, it means a lot." As they parted ways, Naomi couldn't help but feel a sense of hope, not just for the woman, but for the countless others who might be inspired by her journey. It wasn't about erasing the past or pretending the confrontation hadn't happened. It was about what came after: the growth, the change, the willingness to do better. The impact of that day continued to manifest in unexpected ways. The video had sparked a movement, albeit a quiet one. People in Naomi's town and beyond were taking small but meaningful steps to challenge their own biases. Conversations that had once been avoided were now unfolding openly, with honesty and humility. For Naomi, the greatest lesson was this: change wasn't always loud or dramatic. What began as a tense encounter transformed into a profound lesson. Real change happens when we look beyond assumptions and truly see each other. And even the smallest gestures of empathy can leave a lasting mark. If this story touched you, don't forget to hit the like button, share, and subscribe for more uplifting stories.